This video supported in part by...
Playing VR, I tend to sweat. It gives me an edge. So King of Nerds happens to give me an edge too. Let King of Nerds give you the edge. Bye, King of Nerds.
Okay, full disclosure, I'm coming clean right up front. This video is about the Atari 2600 microplayer just announced last month at CES by MyArcade. Do you feel like I pulled the fast one on you? Is it unfair? Do you feel like you want to see more about the Tempest cabinet that I showed you in the thumbnail? Yeah, you're right, and I agree with you. And now you know kind of how I felt when I found out exactly what the new Atari microplayer was actually going to be. Hey there, welcome back to GenXGrownUp. I am John, and I am a GenXGrownUp. Thank you so much for the click. In this video, we're going to run through what we know so far about that new Atari microplayer. We're going to talk about why I feel the way I do about what they announced ultimately after what they teased, and I will explain why I think there's a perfect place in the market for what I had hoped this microplayer was going to be, and why I think it's not too late. To be perfectly fair, neither Atari nor MyArcade actually pulled a bait and switch on us, but I did feel like they were leading me down a particular path with images that were teased on social that ended up being completely unexpected and not what we were anticipating when the products were fully revealed. So let me first run through what we do already know about this microplayer. So it is going to be, though it is the standard microplayer form, it's an arcade cabinet, it's nothing but Atari 2600 games in that form factor. There's going to be about 100 games in the full-size microplayer, and something new to the microplayer, starting with this one, seems to be an adjustable brightness level, so maybe you can preserve how you burn your battery, depending on what your environment is. They also showed, and I spotted at CES, a nano player variety of this. Again, it's the standard nano player shape with about 75 titles, and though I didn't see it in images from the show floor, I think that implies that likely they'll do a Pico version of this too, and following the trend, drop it down to about 50 Atari 2600 games. My first and immediate reaction when I saw this thing revealed at CES was, what a missed opportunity. You just partnered with one of the most legendary arcade vendors in the world, Atari, and then you have this arcade cabinet toy, and you're putting in it old console games. Now granted, many Atari 2600 games were ports of arcade games, but come on, that's a technicality, and not one that I think that anybody was actually exploring or trying to utilize here. It's just Atari 2600 games. And then I saw the layout for the controls, where the stick was on the left and the buttons on the right. Well, if you actually did play Atari 2600 when you were a kid, like I did, you actually used the stick with your right hand and you hit the button with your left because you held the stick in your hand. So if you're really trying to reach people that know Atari 2600 games, that should be reversed. And why do we have two buttons? It all just kind of feels like an afterthought, almost as if they had developed a software package for that Pocket player, which, by the way, I'm very excited about and looking forward to, and said, are there any other devices we could shove this software into? How about a microplayer? Well, should we move the buttons? No. We've already got a one-stick, two-button microplayer. Just reuse it and put the same software in it, and throw a 50th anniversary sticker on the side. Now, when I first saw the teaser images before CES, I was super excited because, look, I knew they'd partnered with Atari, and then they showed this awesome silhouette of an arcade cabinet, which I knew was a microplayer, and I'm like, oh man. So we're gonna get real arcade games, real arcade ROMs into these cabinets now? How awesome is that gonna be? Now, at that point, I wasn't certain, of course, but when I saw the Pocket player and saw that it was loaded with 2600 games, I'm like, even better. They've taken care of the 2600 crowd. Now it's time to get to those arcade games and load up this microplayer or release a bunch of microplayers. But that wasn't the case. And I don't think it was an irrational assumption. Look, every single microplayer released, with the exception of the Jaleco Sports titles just released this past year, were arcade titles in an arcade cabinet, which made perfect sense. Now, granted, a lot of them were NES ROMs. They weren't the original arcade game, but you're bringing me an arcade game into this arcade cabinet. And there was a trend pre-pandemic. The last three microplayers that we got from MyArcade had genuine arcade ROMs in them, and the cabinets were slightly specialized. We got the Space Invaders, we got the Contra, and we got that Street Fighter 2. So I think you can see how all of this data culminated in my mind and kind of tumbleweeded together to make it perfectly obvious to me that the only thing these microplayers could ever be would be Atari arcade hits in this form factor. It never crossed my mind that 2600 titles would be crammed into this thing. But that's what we got, and I just don't think it makes sense. So let's circle back then and talk about that Tempest micro player that you saw in the thumbnail that we talked about a little bit earlier. Look, that wasn't just a ploy to get you to click on this video, although it seems to have worked because you're here. But if you've made it this far in the video, it's likely because you saw that like I did and said, that's what I had hoped would be released by My Arcade with this wave of amazing Atari stuff. The 2600 is covered. We have the plug and play covered. What we're missing is the love of those original arcade titles in a tabletop unit, and with, again, original arcade ROMs, and in some cases, some correct controls, like a spinner for Tempest or a trackball for Centipede. This product, and not just this product, but many more like it, are perfect for the market right now based on other offerings. And I'm going to tell you why, but first I'm going to remind you that if you enjoy the work that we do here on GenXGrownUp and the coverage we're bringing you, won't you please consider becoming a patron? Look, for as little as $1 a month, you can support what we do and ensure that we're able to continue to do it. Look, if that's too much of a commitment, you can click that little thanks button below this video, or if all of that's too much, consider sharing this out on social or wherever you hang out and let other people know what we're doing. Even that can help tremendously. Okay, let's talk about why arcade ROMs in a tabletop micro player today, right now, makes perfect sense for the market. There is clearly an appetite for reproductions of original arcade games. You have New Wave Toys making their replicates. These are 1/6 scale toys, and those typically run for about $150 to $200, depending on what type of game it is. So that's a real arcade ROM, and people are buying those, but it is kind of a barrier. There's that $100 and above that you have to be a real devotee of the game to want. There's also Numbskull that are doing the quarter scale arcades, and those typically run about $200 or so. Beautiful cabinets. These are full reproductions of the entire cabinet. Of course, they have the original arcade ROM, but they also duplicate, the unit itself in scale. Those are gorgeous, but they're well outside of the range of the standard kind of, Target Walmart market. It's not an impulse buy. So if those toys are selling well at that price point, but you're leaving behind a market that wants a sub $100 reproduction of one of their favorite arcade games, this is exactly how you can feed that market. Look back at what we did. We just talked about when they did the premium edition line back in, was that 2020, 2019, something like that. We had Contra and we had Space Invaders and we had Street Fighter. Each was a slightly stylized cabinet, not the default micro player. And they put the real arcade ROM in it, and they sold those for around $45 or $50. So if you look at this Tempest again, I just mocked this up in Photoshop, right? This doesn't exist, that's clear, but I want it to so badly. I want this to be a thing. If you could don't try to reproduce the entire cabinet. Give me a product like this, real arcade ROM, the correct controls of some form or fashion, some beautiful side art, and we're talking put it around a $60 price point. Right, but that $59.99, that's something that, look, if I'm a fan of Tempest and I see this on the shelf and I see it's under $100, I don't even look at the price anymore. This is something that I want. What's your favorite Atari arcade game? You see, Centipede or Tempest or, Missile Command or whatever. Imagine a Missile Command. Look, Replicate just did a Missile Command that I reviewed, and it was wonderful, but it was $160. What if you could get a Missile Command, a little trackball, 3 little fire buttons, and it's like $60 and it's the real arcade ROM? I don't know an arcade fan that wouldn't be at least interested or a buyer in those things. What do you think? Am I way off base here? Is the micro player for the 2600 games what you were wanting and expecting? And I want to know. Please sound off in the comments down below and tell me if this Tempest machine that I just showed you, by the way, I know it's missing a button for the Super Zapper, I'm sorry, but if this Tempest machine I showed you was on the market today for around $60, would you be a buyer? Are there other titles you'd be interested in? Hey, I'm going to throw some links here and here to more videos I've done covering stuff since CES. I certainly hope you found something, though, to enjoy in this video, and I can't wait to talk to you next time. Bye-bye.